Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the SCAS webinar. It's a very special webinar this evening. Professor Carrie Westgarth will be introducing a new toolkit, the Ageing Canine Toolkit, which will really help to improve the quality of life of older dogs and their families. Professor Carrie Westgarth is Chair in Human-Animal Interaction at the University of Liverpool. She has an interesting background in animal behaviour and dog training. She also trained in veterinary epidemiology and human public health. She is a full member of the Association of Pet Behaviour Counsellors and founder of the Merseyside Dog Safety Partnership. In her spare time, though I don't know how she manages to get spare time, she teaches dog training classes and previously was a professional assistance dog instructor and worked in animal rescue. Her practical experience in many areas relating to dogs, combined with a multidisciplinary academic perspective, gives unique strength and relevance to her expertise. We are also joined this evening by Lisa Wallace, a postdoc researcher who conducted much of the research for the Ageing Canine Toolkit. Both Lisa and Carrie will be available to answer your questions at the Q&A session that follows Carrie's presentation. So during Carrie's presentation, if you have questions and points that you want to raise, please put these into the Q&A box. If you get any technical issues during the presentation, please put some chat into the chat box to our administrator. This is a wonderful presentation. I've had the opportunity to preview it, and I really wish this had been available during my time in veterinary practice. So over to you, Carrie.
Hello, my name is Professor Carrie Westgarth. I am Chair in Human-Animal Interaction at the University of Liverpool, and I lead the Westgarth Anthrozoology group, the WAG Lab. And I'm here today to talk to you about the Pet Savers Old Age Pets research project that we had that was funded by BSA VA Pet Savers and led to the development of the Ageing Canine Toolkit. So I'm going to tell you about the toolkit itself and all the research that went into that. And I would like to say that this work wasn't, I led the work as the principal investigator, but it was completed mainly by two wonderful people, Dr. Lisa Wallace and also Jodie Jackson. So Lisa was the postdoctoral research associate funded by the project, and Jodie Jackson was an MPhil student funded by the project. So the problem that we have is that senior animals are quite a lot of the pets that we own. You know, they're not all young. It's a significant proportion of the client base in veterinary practice. But anecdotally, we know that many owners are not really aware of the signs of age-related diseases, and some opportunities to educate them on those sort of pathological versus normal signs are being missed, and this is what we found in our research. Vets are relying on those vaccination appointments to perform these clinical examinations in older pets, but not all dogs go to the vets for their vaccinations. And we know that, for example, and from the PDSA Paul's Wellbeing report, around 23% of dogs were not receiving those regular yearly boosters in order to have those health checks when these were being done. And when people do go to the vets, the focus of the conversation, that consultation, tends to be on a current physical health problem that the owner is aware of, and therefore has booked an appointment to discuss that. But what even is old age? What do we mean by older pets? Well, some some references talk about senior food, for example, to be fed for dogs from age 7, but actually a lot of people think about different sizes or weights of dogs actually aging differently. So you would have the smaller dogs hitting senior and geriatric, for example, life stages later in years than giant breeds, for example. So, I mean, that's more specific than blanket definitions of when a dog is old, and how we think about that may also vary by owners as well, and different vets. This is one of the things we wanted to look at. But even then, it doesn't, it's taking into account some aspects of the context of the animal, but it's also not taking into account breeds or perhaps, other things such as earlier life experiences that could be impacting health. So in this study, we had 3 main projects that we did as part of it, and we were looking to recruit UK-based dog owners and veterinary professionals. When by veterinary professionals we mean veterinary surgeons, veterinary nurses and veterinary physiotherapists in this case. And we did mixed method studies, but tried to bring the findings sort of together in some forms. So we did in-depth interviews as one strand, online questionnaires, and we also had something called SAVSnet, which is a small animal veterinary surveillance network at the University of Liverpool, which brings in electronic health records from numerous veterinary practices across the UK. It's not the whole coverage, but a significant number, meaning that we have, millions of animal health records, consultation notes that we can search for specific phrases and things and bring up. So the objectives of the different parts of this study, first we started with interviews, and this was done by Lisa Wallace, my postdoctoral researcher that was funded by the project, and she was looking at people's expectations, experiences and attitudes to aging and senior dog preventative healthcare or treatment for diseases. So really exploring what people's experiences were, why they decided to take their dog to the vet, what they noticed as their dog age, for example. So understanding how people were thinking about those normal versus pathological changes during aging. And to do this, she had 15 owners that she interviewed who had multiple dogs as well. So there was, I think it was 21 dogs were included in this, and 11 veterinary professionals, and this was for interviews that could be a few hours long, that in-depth look at how people were thinking about these issues and behaving, and what they said they'd done and why. We also followed that up, because that's obviously a very in-depth look. We followed that up with questionnaire surveys to try and think about some of these clinical diseases that people were saying their dogs had suffered from, or vets were reporting. We could ask about different clinical conditions that dogs had suffered over their lifespan and ask some questions about that, what people noticed, what age the dogs were, for example. Ask about those common clinical signs, so what are the types of behaviours or physical signs people are noticing in their dog as they age, and when they do that, and how urgently did people want to seek veterinary advice or care about these things, and also their use of senior health initiatives such as senior health clinics, which some veterinary practices offer and some owners have been to. And this was with 633 owners. We got to fill in these questionnaires, and 305 veterinary professionals. And then also we have the SAVSnet part of this. So this was an MPhil project by Jodie Jackson that was running alongside the 2-year project that Lisa was doing as a postdoc. And for the SCAS network, we wanted to determine when veterinary professionals were considering a dog to have reached old age. When did they start using words specifically around aging? What were the common issues and presenting complaints and signs and diagnoses that were in the health records that were mentioning aging? And we sampled 1,000 records, and once we'd taken out the ones that weren't necessarily relevant in the hit rate for those search terms, we analysed and summarised 832 electronic health records. And so this piece of work, obviously this is 3 separate papers that have been published now, and I'll be talking about the references at the end. But this is obviously quite a lot of work, and I've only got a short presentation, and I'll just summarise some sort of top-line findings that I think are particularly of interest to you. So one of the interesting things about the SCAS network is that we could look at when people were starting in the veterinary records to use terms around aging with these canine records. So we searched for 5 specific words in what we call a regex, a regular expression, a big search term. One's elderly, one's old, one aging, one geriatric, or one senior. So we're thinking that would be the type. Old happened to actually be the one that had the sort of worst accuracy, because that would bring out older owners as well in particular. Or elderly as well would do that. But then we had to screen out the ones just to make sure they were definitely referring about the dog. And you could actually see that the median years of age that of the dog in the records that of the vets were using these words in the notes did change a little bit depending on the word being used. So elderly tended to be used for the much older dogs, as opposed to senior being, a good 3 to 4 years younger. And there's a little what called a violin plot there to illustrate that more visually. We could also look at the median ages of different breeds that was in this sort of old age dogs cohort of electronic health records. And you can see that the older the dogs tend to be the Yorkshire Terrier and the Jack Russells, for example. So backing up that idea, those small terriers do tend to live longer. The most common were mixed breeds, and Labradors and Jack Russells were high numbers as well, and Cocker Spaniels. They're the most common records in terms of breeds. So one of the interesting things that came out of the interviews is this idea of just old age. So this is one of the main themes that came out. So people would say, well, things like they're sleeping a lot, they're old. You tend to think, well, they're all right, they're just asleep. There's nothing wrong with them. Whereas then the veterinary professionals were saying to us, they had experiences where owners would bring the dogs in, and they're thinking, look, if only you had brought this to me a few months ago, I could have done something about this. If only you'd known that these signs was something you could have brought to me, I could have advised you and helped your dog at this point, even if that's not something that we can actually treat and reverse. In some cases it was, but we could have done something earlier to help you manage this and improve the quality of life of your dog and your well-being as an owner. So that was one of the main themes that came out of the interviews. And these are the other themes that came out of the interviews as well. So we've talked about this idea of just old age. So there were a number of behavioural changes and physical changes that owners and vets talked to us about, as were often perceived as just old age, and the types of things they noticed or didn't notice. And like I say, the vets might perceive these as actually age-related diseases that they could do something about, but it was often quite late on before it was brought to their attention. There was another theme around barriers to seeking care, in general, but also specifically for older dogs. These could be owner-related ones, such as cost or ability to get to veterinary practice. There could be dog-related ones. Interesting one that came out quite a lot was that the dog is reactive and dog doesn't enjoy going to the veterinary practice. It's stressful for everyone, so that does put people off. There were veterinary professional related barriers to care around challenges that they have about giving the time, for example, in the day to be able to have those conversations with owners more widely about how their dog is aging. And there was others, so for example, people were reflecting about things like COVID experiences. There was a whole theme also about trust in veterinary surgeons and what engenders that trust to be able to seek advice from veterinary surgeons about things, and how they would whether they would trust the advice being given by vets. And there were some sub-themes that are really interesting around this, around the importance of continuity of care. So seeing the same vet time and time again, obviously that can be challenging to deliver in the practice situation. Feeling that your vet prioritised the care needs of your animals, that they were empathic, that you had that accessibility with them, that you felt they were knowledgeable, that they clearly communicated what was needed, but also owners really liked the idea of having that definite diagnosis and struggled to trust vets that couldn't give them a clear definite diagnosis, which sometimes is obviously the case for certain symptoms. And there was a number of themes here also around how perhaps different tools could be used to improve healthcare, having standardized information or screening tools, repeated assessments, quality of life around those common signs, and you'll see how that's going to influence the work that I'm going to be presenting to you today. So back to the SAVSnet, you can see here what were those most common conditions that we were finding within those electronic health records of this cohort of aged dogs. So within those 800 records, there's over 2,000 different sort of presenting complaints that were discussed, and there's an international classification to diseases system for categorizing health conditions, not just animals and humans, although we have to modify it slightly for to be applicable to animals. So because, for example, there generally isn't a euthanasia type categorization in humans, but you can see what were those common sort of broad conditions. So mostly some sort of weight, that could be weight gain, there could be weight loss, musculoskeletal conditions and symptoms, and dental being the top three there that we were finding in these records. And then, of course, with the questionnaires, we will be able to ask a little bit more about these sort of individual conditions that were coming up from the interviews and from the electronic health records. So this is just obviously some of the conditions, but we could look at what age the dogs were of the dogs that are having those conditions, and also we could look at the age that the owner first reported seeing clinical signs related, different clinical signs that could be related to some of these conditions. So with the ages of the dogs with different conditions, dementia tends to, or canine cognitive function, they tend to call it doggy dementia, was quite older, and vestibular disease, for example, as opposed to things like diabetes and skin problems being present or noticed in a lot of younger dogs in comparison. If we look at those clinical signs and how they've reported them, things like sleeping all the time, loss and losing weight and muscle conditions and problems with stairs and jumping tends to be something that's reported quite later on in the dog's life, as opposed to other things like having smelly ears, limping or tartar much earlier. The questionnaires also gave us some really interesting insights into the differing perceptions that veterinary professionals versus owners were having about things. So we'd asked the dog owners when they thought their dog had reached old age, or whether they thought their dog was old already, and they about 61% said yes, they thought their dog was old, and their median current age that they were of these guys was 13 years, and then their median age they thought their dog had sort of turned old, however it is that we perceive that, was around 11 years. But generally you could see whatever age that if somebody thought their dog was old now, they generally thought their dog had turned old about 2 years previous to that. 84% of them have been taken to the vet in the past year, so higher than that PDSA pool report estimate, but that's probably because we are going to be accessing an online convenience sample of probably fairly engaged owners in the first place that are filling in this survey. But that's still not all of them have been taken to the vet in the past year. And if we look at this table on the right, we'd also asked our dog owners and our veterinary professionals to tell us how frequently they thought otherwise healthy senior dogs should be going to a vet. So we're talking here, checkup. Whereas about 40% of the dog owners said they should go every 6 months, whereas that was most common answer from the veterinary professionals. Over 70% were saying they should be going every 6 months. The second most common answer being every year, of course. But interestingly, only there were 15% of dog owners that said that a senior dog should only go to the vet if it got sick, whereas only 2% of veterinary professionals thought that was appropriate. So veterinary professionals were significantly feeling that, compared to dog owners, that that senior or aging dogs should be visiting the vet much more frequently. Should be going about every 6 months at least. And nearly all veterinary professionals, 92%, believe that senior and geriatric dogs should also receive yearly vaccinations as well. Whereas 20% of our dog owners said that their dogs weren't vaccinated in the previous year, and common reason for this, a third of this, was that they didn't think that older dogs needed vaccination. So there's a differing of opinion there as well. We also asked a little bit about senior dog wellness clinics, how they've been offered and when they've been used. And 10% of those dogs that were considered old enough to have had them had attended some sort of senior wellness clinic or examination. And 14% of practices said they had offered them. There was more, 15% all said that they had offered them in the past but didn't currently for various reasons. I think this is one of the things that also shut down during COVID and then has failed to restart. So in terms of this idea of old age, again, we could explore this further in the questionnaire in a more quantifiable way. So we asked the vets, if you look at the graph on the left, we asked the veterinary professionals to tell us what sort of clinical signs that they thought owners were just believing, mostly believing were just old age and weren't coming to the vets about. And you can see that sleeping all the time, slowing down on walks, being stiff on rising, and tartar in the teeth were again these top ones. But there's lots of others as well. There was more than this, but this is the top ones I wanted to present to you. And then we asked similar questions to the owners. So this was the percentage of owners who wouldn't take their dog to the vet as they thought this clinical sign was just old age. And again, slowing down on walks, sleeping all the time, being stiff on rising. And tartar is in there, but a bit lower down. But you can start to see patterns in the kind of clinical signs that are problematic, that perhaps we can do something to help dogs with. Maybe they are a sign of pain, but owners are tending not to do anything about that. So generated from the interviews and then explored in much more further quantitatively in these surveys. And that you could see in that interview theme summary I went through earlier with you, there was a need for a toolkit of some sort identified through these interviews. You know, there were kind of rough checklists that some vets had sort of put together personally in their heads that they would go through with owners to try and fit into the consult. You know, how's it drinking, how's it eating, how's it urinating, what's changing with the patterns, how's the pooping, peeing, how's the exercising, are we bright and happy? So some vets were coming up with their own rough checklist to try and prompt owners to think about, is there anything you need to tell me? But the problem is it's a busy practice, there's 10 minutes appointments, because that's the only way they can get to see all the people that are trying to book appointments. So this is really challenging to be able to have those conversations. And you know, there were suggestions that some sort of noted cards, something little bullet points in manageable chunks to help prompt people to think about these things and discuss things would be really useful. So we managed to follow this up in the survey and ask some questions around this. So, you know, would owners or veterinary professionals be willing to complete a short questionnaire about signs of aging, for example? Majority of veterinary professionals and owners both said, you know, yeah, this would be great, you know, high in the 80s agreement. And then some of the vet practices, you know, said actually, yes, we already do this. Yes, we've got an automated way of doing this, a checklist. Some said yes, in principle, would like to do this. Some of them said yes, the vet should be responsible for it, and some of them said yes, but the vet nurses should be responsible for it. So we had some wide-ranging ideas about how this could possibly work, and I think you could see that it needs to be something quite flexible that vet nurses could lead on or vets could lead on. It could be built into an automated system, or it could be paper-based. So what have we ended up with? So all of this work sort of came together, and we created, with the help of BSAVA Pet Savers, what we call the Ageing Canine Checklist, which is built into a booklet called the Ageing Canine Toolkit, which has a lot of, well, it has a few copies of the checklist in it, but then it also has some background information on the different topics that are in the checklist, just to give owners a bit more information. But essentially the most important part is this Ageing Canine checklist. So we're going to go through it now. So it's basically a traffic light checklist. This is the version in the booklet. The previous slide was what the poster looks like that can go on the wall, for example. So is your dog, you know, we have these questions about mobility as being one of the first point of the checklist, because this is both the actual conditions in the SAVSNet database, the electronic health records, but also those clinical signs that people were noticing as saying just old age and I probably wouldn't do anything about it. This is all the top sort of musculoskeletal thing, and mobility as a theme. And sometimes the way that we've written this checklist isn't necessarily clearly that one question could only mean one type of diagnosis, but we've themed this around and worded all this in around a way that from the interviews are the types of ways that owners are thinking about this, in terms of getting that information out of them. There could be a number of reasons why the dog was slowing down or gaining weight, or having weight loss and things like that. So it's not directing them to an actual clinical condition, but it's allowing the owners to talk to the vet, and then the vet is then able to diagnose what condition this symptom or collection of symptoms is likely to be about. So we start with mobility. Is your dog slowing down, tiring on walks, or wanting to go for a walk less? Are they struggling with stairs, getting onto a sofa or bed, or stiff on rising? Are they limping, dragging, or scuffing their feet, wobbly or falling over? So again, that could be a neurological thing, but it's about the way they're moving. So that's how we're framing it for the owners. And there's a checklist of yes, they are, maybe, or no. And basically, if they say yes or maybe, we're saying just please contact your vet and discuss this. Then we've got dental. So have they got some sort of tartar? And then behaviours as well. Are they reluctant to eat hard foods, or have their teeth checked? Because that could be a sign. Or are they chewing more on one side of their mouth, if owners can notice that? So trying to indicate there might be some dental disease or pain that's going unnoticed. And then we've got weight gain. Has your dog gained weight recently? But also, do they have a fatter belly? Because there are, I'm not a vet, you could probably tell, but there are clinical signs that could be they're not necessarily putting on weight, but their belly could be swelling up for different conditions that need treatment. Then we move on to weight loss. So has your dog noticeably lost weight or muscle condition even though they're being fed the same amount of food? So obviously we've worded that so that isn't sort of deliberate weight loss, or weight loss that we know they're being fed less, and therefore that makes sense. But those ones where they shouldn't really be losing weight given their normal behaviour and their normal health and what they're being fed at the moment. There's a number of questions around behaviour. So one's around sort of general sort of depression, I guess. Is your dog acting depressed, lethargic, looking sad or disinterested in life? Do they spend nearly all the time sleeping, or have they become grumpier? So the grumpier thing could be related to a painful condition, or it could be, just generally, are they becoming less tolerant of things? So trying to pick up those things that could indicate perhaps clinical diseases during the way that the dog's just not their whole normal sprightly self anymore. There's also some questions around confusion. We want to separate this from behaviour. So one of the things that the interview and the questionnaire survey showed us is that quite often owners were recognising some sign of doggy dementia or canine cognitive dysfunction, and they didn't really know what to do with that, and the vets didn't necessarily know clearly how to deal with that either, because it isn't a simple fix. But there are things that can be done to help owners manage that. It can cause a lot of significant caregiver burden, which we will go on to talk about as well. So we have questions around, does your dog have episodes looking confused, staring into space, bumping into things, or aimlessly pacing, or have they started waking in the night, become more anxious? But then also, are they losing their sight or hearing? Because these things often go together, and it's sometimes you don't know whether the dog is behaving differently and being confused because they can't see or hear as well as they used to. They're becoming less obedient and responsive to you. So it could be a sight or hearing thing, or is it actually some level of canine cognitive dysfunction that can be assisted perhaps with medication and lifestyle changes. So it's to flag those up those conversations. So going on, we have questions about toileting. Have they started having accidents or urges to go to the toilet when they were previously house trained? Again, this could be linked with things like canine cognitive dysfunction, of course, or there could be other sort of urinary or gastrointestinal problems that need addressing. Whether they're drinking more than usual or going to the toilet more frequently, or both. And lumps and bumps we put in there as well. Any lumps or swellings appeared on the dog's body, you know, it could just be a fatty lump, but we just don't know, and it's worth getting that checked out. And then we do have other signs. You know, we couldn't list everything, but we wanted to just put a few things in that people might need to be aware of. Obviously, if your dog's showing any of the signs of being unwell, we do want you to go and get this checked out. So a few examples: coughing being on there because of the links with heart disease in particular, and panting as well. And then the final few questions, we talked about the wording for these quite a lot and what would be the best way to do it. So one is about quality of life. So sometimes you can't think there's anything specific, but are you concerned about your dog's quality of life? Is something making you thinking these things aren't the same for that dog anymore? Or is quality of life getting worse, and you can see that trajectory? That's definitely an idea to go and talk to your vet about that. And when caring for a senior dog, one of the themes that came out of these interviews was around that caregiver burden. It can be hard, and we really, you know, this is a human-animal relationship, and we really need to be thinking about not just the dog's welfare, but the owner's well-being, and how they can best manage this. And it may be that they are putting up with something that they think is a consequence of their dog getting old, that there's nothing that they can do about it. But actually, the dog, you know, advice could be given to help them manage this, whether that's medication and treatment or lifestyle support and advice, resources they can be directed to. So we did want that question: is looking after your dog becoming more challenging than it used to be? So that people, if they start thinking, you know what it is, can they seek out some support to try and help them and the dog with that? And then we don't want to scare people into thinking about euthanasia. The really interesting thing is that we'd really like to do some more research into this area. We couldn't have massive conversations about this, but the whole end-of-life care part of things was interesting in that owners really did not want to think about this. Often until it was quite late to be having the conversations and thinking about this. Some of them had never discussed what they were going to do when the dog died, or how they would think about dealing with a situation when their dog was seriously ill, and they would maybe have to think about euthanasia. Some of them hadn't discussed that even as a family until the interview, and this was the point when they started talking and realized that they all had very different ideas of how this should happen. For example, should they be buried, should they be cremated, all these sorts of things where you kind of need to know before you're going into that situation, because it could be quite sudden. It's going to be very stressful and upsetting at the time. So, you know, obviously we don't want to send people to the vets and say, I want to talk about my dog's dying, in case they think, you know, we're sending them to the vet to have their dog put to sleep. That's not what this is about. But it's about finding an appropriate point in the dog's life to have a little conversation with the vet about what's on offer, in terms of what that vet can provide you as a service around those things, and what sort of things, how it might happen, perhaps considering the conditions the dog has right now, and is everybody aware of the information they need to know at this point. So obviously this isn't a traffic light for this one. But we did word, although it's incredibly difficult to think about the end of a dog's life, there are decisions that will have to be made when the time comes. And it's helpful to think about these sooner rather than later, and have discussed in advance with family members. Do you feel prepared for what might happen, and would you benefit from discussing options available with your veterinary practice? Just to prompt people to just have that in the back of their mind when it's an appropriate time, when they feel it's appropriate time to have that, because if it happens suddenly, it can be very stressful. Even when, you know, for example, with my elderly cat, I know that I would like an individual cremation just in a basic, you know, cheap cardboard box, and I'll scatter the ashes. And then somehow still during the consultation with my vet that I have known for 20 years and had other animals put to sleep, because it's just an upsetting time, there was a miscommunication, and I ended up paying for this big urn, this wooden box with a plaque on it and everything, which I now can't get into and to scatter, and I'm going to have to dig a hole to try and bury it, and I still haven't got round to doing that, and it's been 2 years nearly. So even that, you know, it's having these conversations before the stressful time and making sure you've thought about this and everybody knows what's happening can be really useful. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of the research that's gone into the Ageing Canine Toolkit and behind that in terms of the Old Age Pets project that was funded. But now to discuss how to use this checklist and toolkit. We wanted to keep it really flexible, so owners and veterinary professionals could use it in as many different ways as they wanted. So it could be something that is sent out with the text message or the letter about booster consults. It could be used in nursing clinics. It certainly definitely is really useful, I think, for senior pet consults. If you know you've got a senior pet coming in for a consultation, you could send them this beforehand. You could give it to them in the waiting room to think about before they came in. You could just have a poster, you know, the poster that's available on the consulting room wall, and just talk through it with them at the time. One vet I spoke to says that she does the consultation and then she gives them this checklist and says, have a look at that checklist. If you've got anything you have concerns about, then, you know, book in with me again and we'll discuss it, just so that she knows if she hasn't had time to do a thorough conversation with the vet and with the owner in a very busy practice. She's giving them some information to go away with, and hopefully they will come back and book in a new one, or they'll have it there for the vaccination the next year. They'll have already looked at this checklist. So yeah, you could use it for any sorts of screening purposes. What about repeat medications? You could have it on the repeat medication invites. If you've done a procedure with a senior dog, you could send them out with the booklet after. You could just have them around the waiting room, or like we said, on the consulting room wall, or you could share on social media. There's lots of different ways to do it. It has actually, it is starting to be built into a few practice systems, the electronic systems that have been developed over the years, as checklists actually within that, so that it could be used in a more formal way of going through for each owner as an electronic form. What's the uptake so far with all of this? So we launched in March 23 at BSAVA Congress, and we've also presented it at BVNA Congress as well. It went out with the companion magazine with BSAVA in May 23. So far, updates at the moment, we're on nearly 4,000 leaflets have been given out, the printed copies, and nearly 6,000 copies of the posters. And it's also downloadable off the website in electronic form, in sort of PDF. You can print them out yourselves. Again, nearly 5,000 leaflets and nearly 1,000 posters have been downloaded that way. There's also a BSAVA page visit that you can visit, and there's lots of supporting articles linked in to give you more information on these sorts of conditions. Like I say, you can visit these articles, and so where to get it from, it's on the BSAVA website. You can just download it there. And you can also ask them to send out printed copies. We would really like to know your feedback on this, so I'd be really happy to discuss with you after this presentation what you think about it, how you found it, how you might want to use it in the future, whether that be for animal professionals in practice or as owners, how we found this. We've also got a survey link that you can fill in to give us feedback as well about the project, and that will come through to us. Of course, you can email me at carrie.westgarth@liverpool.ac.uk. And I've got lots of people I would really like to acknowledge at this point. We've got Dr. Lisa Wallace, did most of the work. She's a postdoc that was funded on this. Jodie Jackson was the MPhil student. There's a whole supervisory team that have helped: Alan Radford, Alex German, Aniko Kubinyi, and Zoe Belshaw. And Georgia Woods, the veterinary nurse, has also helped us with the project. But of course, we really want to thank PSAVA Pet Savers, and Sally Everett and Sarah Williams for supporting the project. Otherwise, it just literally wouldn't have happened. We do have a Facebook page. We do have a Twitter account, although I'd admit we don't do much on the Twitter account anymore. And there's, with the 3 publications are out if you want to know the detail of these attitudes to aging dogs. It's all in those 3 publications, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. It's brilliant. I just can't emphasize enough how valuable that must be in companion animal practice. We're getting some questions.
Yeah.
Dr. Sandra McCoon has asked if the toolkit has to be used with a vet professional, or can an owner use it on their own?
Yeah, she's got 2 as the second part of that question as well. Yeah, so it's designed so it can be used many different ways. So the owner can just have it on their own at home and then just go through it, or the vet could go through it with them, or they could give them to go through it in the waiting room before they go into consultation. They could send it out as the link to it as part of their vaccination reminder. But yeah, the owner to use it, the vet to use it, for them to use it together as well. There's many different ways we hoped that it would be used, and so we kept it quite simple for that reason, so it could be used in different practices and by different owners, and even, you know, dog trainers and behaviorists, perhaps, when, you know, they're working with an aging dog as well. They could say, you know, have you seen this toolkit? You know, there's 3 copies, you can take this home. But we hope that it can be used in many different ways.
Sandra also has a supplementary question to that. Is there any data about consistency between veterinary professionals and owners?
So in terms of the scores, does that mean the score on the checklist? We haven't done any research. We've had no funding further to do any more research on how it's being used, which would be lovely to do, but obviously funding is challenging. We did have a bit of stuff when it came to the Lisa can probably better ask these questions. When she did the surveys, she did ask some similar worded questions about certain clinical signs that, and she had in the owner surveys about what they were noticing, and in the vet surveys about what they notice in dogs or what they think owners notice, and so she could see the consistency. Do you want to talk about, Lisa, is there any inconsistencies and consistencies? I think I mentioned in the talk that the cognitive doggy dementias type stuff was where we saw quite a difference.
Yeah, that was the really interesting part of the research, was getting to talk to both from the owner's perspective and from the veterinary perspective. And what was really clear quite early on is that they use very different language. And we were very much wanting the tool to be accessible for owners. So we tried to use the language that the owners would use specifically when they were talking about their own dogs, so that it would be easier for them to use. But the veterinary professionals, they were happy for owners to go through it and fill it in, but the majority of them would prefer to go through it with them, at least for the first time, so that they could elaborate a little bit on their answers, because sometimes the owners were unsure how to answer the question. So whether they could definitively say yes or maybe was always a bit of a grey line. And I think that's where utilising the veterinary nurses and or obviously the vets themselves to go through it with them would help the owner, at least for the first time. And we were always hoping that this would be something that would be done over a long period of time. So maybe every 6 months or so, or even every 3 months as the dog got into the geriatric phase. And in that way, we could pick up so much more easily. And then cater for the language for both, obviously, owners and vets as well. So we know vets have different level of experience with communication. And it was very interesting for me, as I said, speaking to them from both sides, so from the owner perspective and the veterinary perspective. And I would say that the majority of vets were very intuitive. They knew pretty much all of the common problems that owners might have, had experience of that. And it's just a way now, a better way of getting in there with owners and actually getting to really think about their dog's symptoms and any changes, because some of them can be very gradual and can be difficult to see. But when you start to pick apart each little separate section, then it becomes slowly more clear for the owners, and they are able to see more clearly with veterinary professionals changes over time. But that was specifically what we were interested in when looking at from both sides. So that's what we were hoping, that it would be a tool to increase communication between owners and veterinary professionals.
Another question, this one from Emily. Is there a plan for a feline toolkit?
I get asked this all the time. We just had our second or third big grant rejection on this. I'm trying really hard to get funding for the feline stuff, but it's even harder to get funding for feline health and welfare than it is for canine. So yeah, I'm trying. I've had a student project, veterinary student project, have a little look at SAVSNet's data, at least a smaller sample, because it's just a student project. They've got not got long, but she's done a sterling job. She worked really hard. And I don't know that we'll be able to write this up, but you know, it's sort of pilot data. Noticing mats in the that we just noticed in the text quite often. A vet was noticing that an animal was quite matted or had mats. So I think that's a sign we would absolutely have up there. And then she looked at the sort of signs that they were noticed, the things were being written down, and that was one of the things, not being able to groom and having mats. And then she looked at what sort of conditions these aging cats were being seen for, and that was highly associated with musculoskeletal disease. So there's things like that you know, it's different with cats, and I think owners would notice different things, and there are also different animals that behave in different ways. So we really do need more detail on a feline one.
Another interesting question, this one from Karen. Are there plans or work in place to link this approach to pet bereavement care, i.e. with regard to decision-making process leading to end-of-life care, which can assist owners with grief?
Yes, absolutely. Again, that's another big grant application that we've had rejected, and we're working it up again to try and submit it somewhere else at the moment. It wasn't something within the scope of, because we were looking at aging. Yeah, because we were looking at aging in general, and it was only a 2-year part-time project as well. Lisa only worked part-time on this. My God, she did a lot of work for a part-time post. it was very clear that there's this whole end of life decision making thing that needs much more research and exploration, and a toolkit of its own. The quality of life, we did ask quite a few questions around that. We've got pilot data around those end of life discussions, haven't we, Lisa, from the questionnaires and the interviews, and it was just very clear that people really struggle with that. They're not thinking about that until it's almost too late to make clear decisions. They're not using quality of life tools that we know are out there, that they're not really being used by owners. They're not necessarily aware of them or using them. And yeah, we think there's a whole toolkit around that needs developing. There is, of course, the brilliant work that Blue Cross do in this area with pet loss support, and they're a part of our team that's trying to get this funding to do much more work on that as well.
One of the questions that's come up is, how do you help owners recognise these signs when they don't see them? I mean, when I was in practice, owners would be in denial when the pets were in decline. And it was very difficult because they would put off and put off and put off coming to the surgery. And a lot of them would present their animal when the animal was in such a state that would not respond to treatment, and the only option then was euthanasia. And you know, that's I have never said to an owner, you should have come sooner, because that's just going to compound the grief. But my thinking now is it would be good to have senior workshops in the community to go through your toolkit and the checklist and get them all talking about the signs of aging and what to do, and also tell them what we can do with the various illnesses of old age, what we can do to slow things down.
Yes, I mean, hopefully,
helpful.
Yeah. Hopefully this checklist will help people realise, once it's spelled out to them in words that they understand, like, does he struggle to climb the stairs and things like that. Obviously there's the checklist wording, but then there's wording in the actual toolkit trying to explain these things a bit further. We suggest that people take regular videos of their dogs as well, movements, so that can help them notice things. I mean, we can obviously do as much education as possible, but a lot of the time they were noticing these things, but they weren't going to the vets about it. So it's not that they weren't necessarily recognising the signs, they weren't realising that that's a reason to go to the vet. So we're hoping that having this checklist will prompt people that, oh, yes, I do see that, and therefore I should at least mention that at my next checkup with my vet. Whereas you don't have time during that consultation to go to ask all of those questions to your owner. So we have, you know, I know people that say, you know, this is your checkup consultation, we've done what we can, but here's this book list, read through this checklist when you get home, and if there's anything else that's concerning you, book in again to talk to me. So it's saving vets time, or allowing them to communicate with owners in a way they just would not have time before, or they'd overrun on their consultations if they tried to do all of that themselves.
No, I mean, vets are under a lot of pressure and their time's short, but there's a lot of veterinary nurses that I'm sure would love to run senior clinics. And my experience from vet practice is that many practices do not involve the vet nurses enough.
Lisa,
and I'd like to see that change. So
Lisa asked the veterinary professionals about whether they'd ran senior clinics before and things like that. Do you want to talk about that a bit, Lisa?
Yes, yeah. We did have quite a few of the veterinary nurses who were already specialising in running senior dog clinics, and they gave information to me in the interviews about how they ran them, and it was quite popular. But it was always the same issues that they were having: not enough space, not enough people, not enough time, not enough money sometimes. So most of them will run obviously as a free service, and then if there was an issue that was picked up during the free veterinary nurse consult, it would then be referred on to the veterinarian. And that had worked previously. And as Carrie said, COVID caused mayhem and everything was kind of cancelled. And then, of course, there was the rush to get more puppies during the pandemic, which then led to, not enough time in consultations and veterinary nurses not having time to run clinics. So it's possible that things would change a little bit now, but I think it seems time is the biggest issue to run these. And as what Carrie said before, I also believe that owners were very good at picking up signs in their dogs, but they were describing them as normal age-related declines in their dogs. And also, one of the findings that we found was that new owners who haven't experienced those signs before were much more likely to go to their vets and talk to them about these signs. But owners that had experienced the signs before in the same dog or a previous dog were less likely to go. And that's something that we need to think about, how we can, so they feel like they've already experienced it and they kind of know what to do. And maybe they are doing something, supplements or something, but obviously, as we know, all dogs are individuals and each case is different. So just because they've experienced in the past doesn't mean that it'll be the same outcome or issues that they had previously. It was just an interesting bit of research that we found that could be looked at a little bit more closely.
Questions. This is great.
Just looking through the questions.
There's a couple about behaviourists saying they'd really like to get involved with this. That would be great if you can think of ways as behaviourists we can set up the use of it. I mean, obviously it's there to use. If you want to try out how to use it, experiment with it and let us know what seems to work. But it looks like one of the behaviourists said that they do a sort of senior behaviourist package, training package, and again, it's really hard to get owners engaged compared to the puppies.
Yeah, that was one of the issues that I had in a lot of the interviews with owners. One of the reasons why they didn't take their senior dog or geriatric dog to the vet was because the dog was finding it more stressful. So their levels of resilience had gone down. And I mean, it's a valid point. But what we could do, what we were talking about with the senior clinics, obviously, you can set it up so that it's a lot easier for the elderly dog. So putting down rugs on the floor, obviously, is one thing. Obviously, doing all the consults on the floor, not on the table. There's lots of different things that you can do to improve a senior dog consult, which could hopefully help owners feel less nervous about taking their dogs, and also the dogs themselves. If they're stressed, we could also think about what we can do to relieve the stress in the dog as well. But it's a very, very common thing that we see that as dog gets older, they don't seem to tolerate as much, obviously, and going to the vet can be a stressful situation. And that's where the behaviourists and trainers would come in as well. So obviously there would be a role there for them as well, if they could perhaps provide services for the vets as well. There could be something in that in terms of also doing exercises and enrichment. And obviously the whole physio side is there as well, which we haven't talked about. But we actually did interview a few canine physiotherapists, obviously having a lot of input into aging, and they do a lot of stuff with older dogs. And I've got 2 geriatrics myself at the moment, and you know, we go to the physiotherapist once a week. And yeah, I totally agree with the canine cognitive dysfunction in terms of enrichment. It's something that not many people are looking into with senior dogs. And what we know is, obviously, if their hearing and or sight or other senses are starting to go, then cognition can be affected. And there are things that we can do to try and help halt that, as well as obviously supplements that could be given as well. And so there's a role there for all of the canine professionals to help. definitely.
Did you get any figures on what percentage of owners were reluctant to go to the practice because of their pets' behaviours?
I'm just trying to think. I think we did actually. I'd have to go back into the research, but it was a common one. It was one of the more common answers. But it could also be that unfortunately some dogs who have chronic conditions, you know, if they have to go to the vet many times and have painful possible, you know, consults, then obviously a fear of going to the vet is going to increase with age as well. And so that's the type of questions that, you know, we were getting, that people were saying, yeah, my dog's always had a problem with the vet, so it's very hard for me to take them there. But that's something also that Dogs Trust is looking at with dog-friendly clinics, and ways to improve the situation, obviously, for dogs. But it was quite a common thing. I also had owners who told me that their dogs used to love going to the vet, and they would, you know, run in with waggy tails and wanted to say hello to everyone and get their treats. But that behaviour had changed, obviously, as the dog became a lot older and had problems with sensory loss and canine cognitive dysfunction. So yeah, it's something that we can look into as well.
I think it's a key issue, because, you know, clearly there are animals missing out on veterinary care because of their behaviour. And
it came up in another study as well. We had, around the same time, we did a study on access to veterinary care for chronic conditions. Which then COVID happened, so it came very intertwined with COVID. And the people who had reactive dogs said during COVID it was loads better because they could keep the dog in the car and the vet would come out and check the dog over in the car. And so they could actually take their dog to the vet and their dog would be less stressed than how we've gone back to now, where they have to take the dog into the practice.
And I wonder how much of this reluctance to go with reactive dog is embarrassment on the part of the owner.
Yeah.
You know, to be seen with a dog that's misbehaving at vet practice, maybe they find quite upsetting.
There's a really good question from Maureen in the chat, that might be one we want to finish on. Do you want just one more? Or
yeah.
So it says, does the toolkit assist owners and handlers to ask probing questions about vet recommendations for treatments and interventions, such as arthritis shock, surgical removal of non-cancerous cysts, etc.? Owners often cannot completely understand the complications that may arise. So this doesn't at any point in this toolkit talk about the treatments and the advice that would be given. It's all about recognising the signs and how to observe changes in your dog's drinking and things like that, or weight loss, weight gain, changes in their movement, how to observe those signs, and then ask the vet. There's no advice there on what that might be, because different signs could mean that the same sign could mean a different actual clinical thing. So we can't link it we can't link those signs even to specific conditions, and we can't link them to specific treatments. It's all just to get them into the vet practice and asking those questions. There's nothing about advising them what treatments they should be having or not. And obviously, I need to clarify that. That's then up to that. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to not be treading on veterinary professionals' toes and putting things in there that they might not advise. And actually, the one thing that we did do is, we at no point really mentioned vaccinations either, because that does seem to be an area where owners and vets have a wide range of opinions themselves. And if we're just saying go to the vets and have your checkup with your vaccination, if somebody doesn't want to get their dog vaccinated, they might not then want to take their dog to the vet for the checkup because they think that they will be forced to get their dog vaccinated. So we wanted to just keep the vaccination question out of it. That's a discussion between them and their vet to navigate themselves. But we're just trying to get them to think of this sort of health check that they're going through and take their dogs to the vet for that reason, not specifically for vaccinations. Because it does really depend on the dog. Quite often vets might advise a senior dog not to have vaccinations for specific reasons. So there isn't a blanket thing to be advised them.
I also had a few people, owners specifically, who were surprised when they brought in elderly and geriatric dogs that the vet still wanted to vaccinate them, especially if the dogs had chronic health issues and other issues. So in that sense, yeah, it was very difficult for owners to communicate with vets, especially during COVID times, because if they were handing the dog over, they didn't seem to have very much input on what was happening to the dog. And that caused some issues, essentially, where vaccinations were administered where they were maybe not wanting that. So it was quite an interesting time to be doing research, because it really brought forward the main complications and miscommunications that were happening. Another question down here was asking whether owners' fear of costs for veterinary care for any identified old age changes put them off seeking help. Yes, definitely. Finances were one of the biggest issues when it came to senior and geriatric dogs, obviously, because that time of life, a dog may have been healthy all their lives and then very suddenly, obviously, are not anymore and might need multiple procedures, even obviously dental procedures is one of the things that came up quite highly in senior and geriatric dogs. And yes, finances were coming up as flagging with owners as very, a significant issue. And obviously, and the veterinary professionals themselves, obviously that was one of the first things that they would put up, other than, not recognizing the sign as something that needed to be corrected. It could be, obviously, finances were one of the issues. And as we know, insuring older dogs is very, very expensive. And the majority of people can't afford it. By the time the dog reaches 9 or 10, the price has crept up per month so much, that they can't afford it anymore.
It's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to thank Carrie and Lisa for this evening. It's been wonderful. And I do wish that the toolkit had been around when I was in companion animal practice, because it would have made life a lot easier. Our next webinar will be delivered by Professor Danny Mills, who's a veterinarian and the chair of veterinary behavioural medicine at the University of Lincoln. And that will be on Wednesday, the 4th of June at 7 p.m. Now, I'd like you all this evening, you're obviously interested in human-animal interactions. So if you're not already a member of SCAS, I want you to give it serious consideration. We're a One Health, One Welfare organisation. We're founded in 1979, the first organisation in the world created to study human-animal interaction. And we were founded by people from a range of veterinary and human professions. And our membership is still drawn from veterinary medicine, animal behaviour, human health, social work and education. The membership benefits include free access to all our monthly webinars and favourable registration rates for our conference, and also for conferences run by other international organisations, IAHIO and ISAS. We've kept the membership rate phenomenally low for decades, because our charity is about learning more about the bond and disseminating information. So it's only £25 for a member, £15 for a student. And we're a very friendly group. This is, as you know, a very exciting and expanding field, and greater understanding of human-animal interactions allows us to deliver better animal and client care. And it reduces the stress of working with people and animals, because we understand that relationship better. So thank you all again for attending. It's been wonderful meeting you all. and hope to see you next month. Thank you.